Hi everyone. In the wake of the release of the iPhone 7, Austin Frank has put together an article called "The Age of Apple is Over." The iPhone 7 was recently released, and some of the features that are new to the iPhone are water resistance, obviously always a better camera, and a better processor, and it doesn't have a headphone jack. And what Austin says is, wow, none of these things are really amazing. They're all just some things that have been done by other companies and other phones, and they already have them. And what Apple's really doing is they're not, raising that bar anymore. They're just meeting the bar where all the other phones are sitting. They seem perfectly content to match the competition and assume that people will purchase their phones just because they're Apple, and that's fine. For a long time, that's been true. Austin goes on to make a pretty bold statement that Apple has in fact peaked. When you first hear that, it's a bit hard to believe. It's easy to say, no way, Apple hasn't peaked. They're just doing great. But when you look at the data, their sales on the iPhone are going to decrease for the first time in 10 years, and that's a big deal. Ever since the iPhone has come out, they've been making incremental innovations to the product, but over time, the amount of incremental development has decreased at each stage of the iPhone. So the jump between the iPhone 1 to the 3S was fairly significant, but the difference between the 5 and the 7, well, a lot of people are still using a 5, and it's perfectly acceptable because it's still a really good phone, and compared to the 7, there's a lot of benefits of the 7 that they offer, but nothing you can't live without. He goes on to kind of draw us back to the Apple of the 2000s. And in the 2000s, as we know, Apple created the iPod to start, and that disrupted the music technology in a huge way. They went on to create the iPhone, which was the first phone that really perfected touchscreen technology and disrupted the phone industry. And then they followed it up with the iPad, which disrupted the PC and laptop industry because it was actually a reasonable replacement for them for the first time. There was a product that was something that could replace a computer. And what Austin goes on to say is that Apple's not really involved in any of these next big thing technologies, and at a certain point, when a company gets so big, they stop being truly innovative, and it just seems to be the natural progression of things. And he says that they just lose that competitive fire, and they value preservation over expansion and being innovative. And he goes on to make a comparison. We've seen this happen before. What he claims is happening to Apple now is that the Microsoft of the 90s was kind of the Apple of the 2000s. They created this amazing disruptive technology in Windows software and the personal computer, and that was their product, and they've ridden that since then, and they made them very wealthy then. They're very wealthy now, and they're doing pretty good. They're not growing as much as they have in the past, but it's hard to imagine that they're going to be gone anytime soon. And what he's saying is, the Apple of the 2000s is kind of like the Microsoft of the 90s, and Apple is getting to the point where Microsoft finally got to in the early 2000s, where they're not going to really introduce anything brand new. They're just going to be content to coast on what they've designed in the past and incrementally improve that, and that should be okay for them, but they're not going to be involved in the next big thing. He kind of goes on to talk about why they haven't innovated recently, and he mentions that maybe the loss of Steve Jobs would be the source of that. I'm not really sure I buy that. I think you can find a lot of innovative people and visionaries. While they're few and far between, they are out there, and if Apple wanted them, I'm sure they could get them. But maybe they're not even interested in it because they're content to coast from here on out. Yeah, it's perfectly possible that Apple's onto something really big and they're just not telling us, but I'm going to assume that they aren't. And it really begs the question if Apple was able to create three disruptive technologies in 1 decade, are we expecting too much from a company in Apple? Microsoft created a few disruptive technologies, but really only one that we think of on a regular basis. And they've done great, because it was such a disruptive technology. But most companies don't ever create a disruptive technology. In fact, they just come up with a pretty good product that is really good. It's got great quality. They develop their brand. They increment and innovate in slow steps from there, continuously improve and improve their product line and their offerings, and they do really well. And I think we're kind of not giving Apple the benefit of the doubt and really appreciating just how difficult it is, or it can be, to develop new products and how expensive that can be. In class we talk about the need to innovate and what the lack of innovation will do to a company. And what we really determined was that if a company just completely fails to innovate, they will eventually become obsolete because the competition will take them over. Now, when I think of that company that is becoming obsolete because of a lack of innovation, I kind of picture a mid-sized company who maybe doesn't have all the capital built up like a big player like Apple or Microsoft has. And you see them develop their product line, and then over a 10-year period, they kind of fail to meet the standard of their competition, and they fail to innovate and keep up. And in about 10 or 20 years after that, they're just completely obsolete, and they get bought out, and that's the end of that. So my question to you is, in a case like Microsoft or Apple, like this article is referencing, does that same idea really apply to a company who created such a disruptive technology that they built off of and their whole company is based off of? Is it really reasonable to expect that if Apple doesn't continue to innovate, that they'll become obsolete? I don't know that it is, and I have to believe that Apple is going to be around for a long time no matter what they do. A lot of that because of their brand and the following that they have, but a lot of it just because they'll continue to put out good products that I'll buy and a lot of other people will buy because I like Apple's products and I like their quality. So that's my question to you guys. Is it okay for a company like Apple, who is so successful and had a disruptive technology, to simply coast for the foreseeable future on that initial disruptive technology? Or are companies like Microsoft and Apple even susceptible to becoming obsolete? Is it just prolonged because it'll take a lot longer time for them to become obsolete? Or are they okay to just coast? And is that really an acceptable goal for a company to have? If a company creates a disruptive technology, can they simply develop that forever, forever, and be okay and develop a lot of capital, and maybe eventually they get bought out by some company that we don't even know of yet, and that's perfectly fine? Is there really a need to always be innovating at such a level that the public may expect from you, or is it perfectly acceptable for these companies to coast? So that's my question to you. Can a company the size of Apple coast on their initial disruptive technology, or are they like any other company where they can become obsolete? Can't wait to hear your guys' comments. I'll look forward to replying to them. Thank you guys for listening, and take care.